Hi everyone, I've just brought another video for you guys, so let's get started without further ado. Also, remember to like and comment. Tell me which manhwa you'd like me to cover next. Let's do this.
A young college student's life could be full of fantasies. Maybe he dreamed of being a billionaire with a beautiful secretary, living a life of luxury and power where everything was easy. Or maybe the fantasy was simpler, having a young and dedicated personal maid waiting for him at home after a long day of studying. Or perhaps the dream was a more experienced woman, a socialite who promised a night of experiences he would never forget. There were many possibilities running through his head, but the reality was quite different. For our protagonist, the world was an empty courtyard, and he was completely alone. Until suddenly, a notification on his cell phone panicked him. He looked at the screen and couldn't believe what he was seeing, wondering if he had finally gone crazy. At that moment, his roommate appeared from behind, all excited. Without realizing his friend's shock, he asked if the young man had already sent that message to the girl. Desperate, the protagonist tried to show what was happening, gesturing at his cell phone, but his friend didn't understand anything, thinking he was saying nonsense. The young man wondered if he was the only one who could see it. He thought maybe it was some kind of sign, a message that only he could understand. Tired of the confusion, his friend simply grabbed the cell phone from his hand to take a look, and on the screen, a bizarre conversation unfolded. Upon reading the messages, his friend was also shocked and asked if the protagonist had completely lost his mind. That's when it clicked. Cold sweat ran down our hero's face as he finally understood the truth. He asked incredulously if it had all been a setup. His other friends appeared, laughing at the situation. They confirmed the prank and said he only had 3 minutes to prepare for what was to come. Completely furious at being deceived, the young man went after his friend. He shouted, asking why they lied about the girl being a beautiful senior. While the confusion was happening down below, a group of people watched everything from a nearby walkway. Standing in the middle of everyone, the protagonist finally realized the stupid thing he had done, while his friends enjoyed the situation. He felt like a complete idiot. The protagonist tried to convince himself that there wouldn't be any major problems. After all, it was just a joke, and soon everyone would forget the embarrassment he went through. But just as he was trying to compose himself, a female voice called him. He stopped in his tracks, surprised. It was a serious-looking woman who stared down at him with an imposing posture. She summoned him to her office, demanding an explanation for all that noisy confusion. The young man froze instantly. His expression betrayed the total panic that took over his body. She didn't seem to be joking and repeated the order for him to go up immediately without making her wait another second. And to make matters worse, his friends began to say goodbye to him as if they were sending him to his death. They wished him good luck and promised they would remember him fondly. Despair took over the protagonist. He was completely terrified of what was to come. Only, out of nowhere, a holographic screen appeared right in front of him. It offered an invitation to participate in something that would change his life, while his friends watched, enjoying the situation. He couldn't believe it. It was the same bizarre notification that had appeared on his cell phone before. This wasn't just a joke. Faced with the choice, his hand trembled. Accept or decline. The decision was literally at his fingertips, but then a smile spread across his face. After everything he'd been through, he thought anything would be better than his current life. He wasn't going to refuse. With a touch, he made his choice. Instantly, the screen shattered into pure energy, completely enveloping him in a blinding light. Fragments of bluish light flew everywhere, marking the beginning of a transformation that he could no longer stop. When the light dissipated, he was no longer in the same place. The young man found himself in a totally futuristic environment, full of screens, technology, and even strange creatures. Completely lost, he looked around, trying to understand where the hell he had ended up. This was definitely no longer the university. As he tried to process what had happened, a voice called him, and he turned to see who it was. It was a woman who stared at him with a slight smile, as if she was already waiting for him. She greeted him with a confident expression, acting as if she knew exactly who he was and why he was there. Her posture made it clear that, in that strange and futuristic place, she was in charge of everything. The young man and the woman stood face to face in the middle of that technological hall, ready to start the conversation. The woman began to explain how that world worked, showing different profiles and options on holographic screens. She said that there were no mandatory rules and that the freedom given to clients was maximum, which made the protagonist even more curious. The young man pondered the proposal. The freedom was tempting, but he felt that there was something more behind that offer. She continued, explaining that before any exchange, he could define his own terms. Once the agreement was sealed, however, there would be no turning back. He then asked what would happen if he wanted to return to his world. Her answer was direct. He could come and go whenever he wanted. The revelation caught him off guard. He wasn't switching lives with just anyone, but with someone who really wanted to live his life. It started to sink in. Before making any decisions, he decided he needed to see the profile of the person he would be swapping with. But just as he was about to do that, a commotion in the hall caught his attention. Out of nowhere, a group of people appeared, staring at him with pure hostility. Apparently, his arrival didn't go unnoticed. A bald man, who seemed to be the leader, flashed an intimidating smile. Whatever was happening, the protagonist had just gotten into big trouble. Suddenly, the threat of the hostile group was replaced by a frenzied crowd. Everyone crowded around the protagonist, begging to trade lives with him, offering fame, wealth, and power. He was completely shocked by the situation. The young man couldn't understand why so many influential people would be interested in the life of an ordinary person like him. The pressure was so great that he tried to crawl away, suspecting that it could all be a big trap. He needed to be careful. Amidst the chaos, the protagonist stood up and decided to take action. He faced the person who seemed to be in charge and proposed that they make a deal. It was then that a man in a suit introduced himself with a confident smile on his face. He said he felt honored by the opportunity to trade lives with the young man. Still confused, the protagonist asked why he and everyone else were so desperate to take on the life of a normal person. The man explained that there were two types of people, the very successful and the common. And, according to him, a simple life like the protagonist's was desirable because it didn't have the same problems and responsibilities. The logic didn't make much sense to our hero. He thought that the burdens of each life weren't even close to equivalent. The man in the suit continued, revealing that, after the exchange, the protagonist could use life points to get anything. The idea of being able to trade for everything he wanted amazed him. With a smug smile, the man confirmed. He revealed that this was exactly how he became a billionaire so young, proving that the system worked. But the protagonist still had a crucial question. He needed to know what would happen if he couldn't solve the problems of the life he took on. The answer was simple. There would be no punishment. He just wouldn't earn the points. With everything clarified, the man proposed that they sign a contract, and the protagonist accepted right away. Moments later, the two were already sitting down, signing the papers of the agreement. A mysterious woman watched everything closely, ensuring that the contract was sealed. The contract was huge, and the protagonist felt too lazy to read it all. He signed it anyway, thinking that, in the end, he probably wouldn't be able to solve the other person's problems anyway. Meanwhile, the man in the suit signed with a victorious smile. He was thinking about the problem that the protagonist would have to solve, his own younger sister. The situation seemed to amuse him quite a bit. The protagonist was in total shock. The revelation that the problem he would have to solve was the man in the suit's younger sister caught him completely by surprise. Back in the room, The woman supervising the contract asked the two to close their eyes. The life-swapping process was about to begin. Suddenly, a blue light enveloped the man in the suit, and he simply disappeared. The transfer of consciousness had begun. In the blink of an eye, an intense light took over the protagonist's vision. He felt his body being transported to another place. Upon opening his eyes, the first thing the young man saw was an unfamiliar woman who seemed extremely relieved. She called him President Jin, confirming that the swap had worked. Our hero's first impression in his new life was, well, quite direct. He couldn't help but notice the secretary's assets. Only then did he realize the situation he was in, shirtless, with the woman right in front of him. The embarrassment was immediate. His mind went blank. Where was he? What exactly was happening in that room? The secretary explained that she knocked on the door several times, but since no one answered, she came in and found him lying on the floor. She confessed that she was scared to death. Meanwhile, in our hero's body, the ex-billionaire listened to his roommate explain about the secretary. Apparently, she had already tried to seduce the boss several times without success. Back in the room, the secretary suggested that they continue what they were doing. The protagonist, not understanding anything, just questioned what she was talking about. But the secretary didn't wait for an answer. Realizing the opportunity, the protagonist thought that the life of the rich might not be so bad after all. But just as things were about to heat up, someone called from outside the door. It was another woman's voice, looking for President Jin. The mood was cut short immediately. The secretary and the protagonist were startled by the interruption. The person outside warned that the major shareholder was arriving. Outside, a woman in a suit seemed nervous and hurried the president. The billionaire's life had barely begun and was already full of complications. The woman in the suit didn't wait for an answer and came in completely. The scene she found was, to say the least, embarrassing. The new president on the floor with the secretary in a very compromising situation. The protagonist tried to explain himself, thanking her for the warning about the shareholders' meeting. But the secretary's shame made it clear that this excuse wasn't going to fly. Even the woman who interrupted them was embarrassed by the situation, stammering that she understood the message. Trying to regain her composure, she placed the documents on the table and asked him to sign what was needed for the meeting. But the protagonist, now acting like a true CEO, told her not to rush. He had other matters to resolve first, and only then would he take care of the rest. He then grabbed his shirt to get dressed. Now presentable, he warned that he had an important appointment and needed to go ahead. The secretary seemed impressed with his new attitude. A confident smile appeared on his face. He was starting to get the hang of this life of power. He grabbed a coffee for the road and prepared to face the shareholders. With the posture of someone in charge, he stated that he would meet the bigwigs in person. Meanwhile, in the meeting room, the board of shareholders was already impatient. The president's delay was starting to irritate everyone. They began to question the president's competence, wondering if he was acting so irresponsibly on purpose, perhaps even planning his own retirement. That's when the door to the room was kicked open, and it was him. The protagonist entered the room as if he owned the world, humming and showing no concern for the tension in the air. His attitude left all the shareholders speechless and furious. That disrespectful entrance was the last straw for them. The protagonist's triumphant entrance silenced the board. One of the shareholders, visibly irritated, was the first to break the ice, wanting to know what this clowning around was. But instead of answering, the protagonist simply threw himself onto the table. He complained of fatigue and back pain, treating the shareholder meeting as if it were his living room couch. Vice President Han Jiang lost his patience. He stood up and reprimanded the young man, demanding that he take the company's most important meeting seriously. Only then did the protagonist sit in the president's chair. With a serious expression, he finally seemed ready to start the meeting, but on his own terms. The vice president, however, was not convinced. He continued to stare at the new president with a look of pure distrust, feeling that something was very wrong. Suddenly, Han Jiang's expression changed to complete astonishment. The protagonist had gotten up and approached him. In a provocative tone, the young man warned that this was his life now and that he was not afraid of anything. For him, the fun was just beginning. The president's audacity left the vice president speechless, exploding with rage at the size of the disrespect. The protagonist admitted that his way was a little rude, but made a point of reminding everyone that he was the president. And as such, he demanded a minimum of respect. It was the last straw for Han Jiang. He accused the protagonist of mismanagement, of breaking contracts, and declared in front of everyone that he was not worthy to continue in office. The protagonist listened to everything in silence. He realized that this whole situation was very strange and concluded that the most suspicious person in that room was precisely the vice president. With this new suspicion in mind, he stood up suddenly, determined to take action. He went straight for Han Jiang and grabbed him by the collar. The young man said he was tired of dealing with people like him and that it was a mistake to think they could simply remove him from power. But, to the protagonist's surprise, the vice president didn't seem intimidated at all. On the contrary, a victorious smile appeared on his face as he asked the others to calm down. And then the reason became clear. The protagonist looked around and saw that almost everyone in the room had their hands raised. This was a mutiny. The vote to remove him from the presidency was already underway. With a victorious smile, Han Jiang looked at the protagonist. He asked if the young man saw now that everyone in the room was against him. For the vice president, the mutiny was already a success. The protagonist had no choice but to release the vice president. At that moment, the situation seemed completely out of his control. But instead of showing despair, the young man just leaned back in his chair. He seemed strangely calm, as if he already expected all of this. A tense silence filled the room as everyone waited to see what his next move would be. One of the older members of the board stood up, trying to appease the spirits. He said there was no need to take things to this point, asking to resolve the conflict peacefully. The protagonist replied with a cutting calm. He reminded everyone that they themselves had always said that he was incapable of managing the company. So there was no reason for surprise. The other shareholders joined the conversation, agreeing that such an important decision could not be taken in a hurry and that the position of president should not be his. Victory seemed certain. That's when the young man's attitude changed. The air of indifference gave way to a sharp look and a smile that showed he was exactly where he wanted to be. He leaned forward and declared that if that's what they wanted, then he himself would leave, but not without giving a farewell gift to everyone who betrayed him. Han Jiang's confidence disappeared instantly. A cold sweat ran down his face when he realized that he might have underestimated the young president. A woman, who appeared to be his assistant, confirmed with a smile that everything was ready, awaiting only his command. And then she announced the result of the vote. The decision to remove the president from office had been unanimous. The protagonist looked directly at the vice president, who was now facing away, and ironically congratulated him on the victory. But the victory did not have the expected effect. In a fit of rage, Han Jiang turned the table over with everything on it, shouting that this was absurd. The protagonist fell to the ground with the impact. The vice president's composure completely broke down. While the guards restrained him, he shouted that he was going to end the protagonist, who just watched the scene impassively. His plan had worked perfectly. With Han Jiang out of control, the protagonist seized the opportunity. He pointed out that the vice president's mental state was clearly unstable. and that he needed to be removed immediately for everyone's safety. As he was dragged out by the security guards, Han Jung shouted that this wasn't over and that the story wouldn't end this way. But it was too late. Ironically, the protagonist said goodbye to Han Jung, asking everyone to wish the former vice president good luck in his forced departure. Joining in the joke, the other board members mockingly said goodbye, wishing him well and saying that he would always be in their hearts. The humiliation was so great that Han Jung tasted blood in his mouth. Rage consumed him completely and he couldn't do anything about it. The protagonist watched it all with dark satisfaction. He thought about how hard Han Jung had worked for the company, but seeing his downfall was, in fact, very gratifying. The protagonist's coldness terrified the other shareholders. They realized at that moment how scary the young president could be when provoked. Back in the company's meeting room, the dust was beginning to settle after the chaos. His assistant then updated him on the situation. Both Han Jung and the other traitor had been officially removed from their positions, citing health problems. Before everyone, the protagonist declared that, with the responsibility he had, he would leave the position vacant for now. A suitable replacement would be appointed later. But the news of a vacant position aroused the greed of one of the shareholders. He saw that the perfect opportunity he had been waiting for to seize power. That position, he thought, should be his. The presidency was within his reach, but the protagonist was already expecting this. He realized that the vultures were ready to act exactly as he had predicted in his plan. One of the older members of the board, perhaps sensing the tension that was building, tried to intervene once again. The board member despaired, arguing that the situation was unsustainable and that the protagonist couldn't just abandon ship like that. Another shareholder agreed, pointing out that if things continued like this, the company would face catastrophic losses. Panic began to set in among them, but the protagonist just listened in silence. He watched the chaos he himself had created, coldly analyzing the reaction of each of the traitors. On the other side of the table, some of the shareholders laughed, feeling victorious with the young man's departure. Little did they know that they were falling straight into the trap. It was then that a confident smile appeared on the protagonist's face. He decided that he would leave the rest of the problems for the true owner of that body to solve. With impressive calm, he dismissed the meeting, leaving everyone not understanding what had just happened with the president they themselves had fired. The board members withdrew, confused and frustrated. The victory they thought they had won suddenly seemed empty and uncertain. Alone with his assistant, the protagonist revealed the next step. He ordered her to cancel all his appointments and investigate the company's trading history as quickly as possible. He then approached and thanked her for her help. The assistant, caught off guard by the gesture, warned him that this could be misinterpreted by others. The young man just smiled, showing a side that rarely appeared. A more human and less calculating side, which left the girl not knowing how to react. She was speechless, holding her documents tightly. In her mind, she wondered if she was being too nice to her boss. He touched her face affectionately, a gesture that left her even more speechless. The tension of the meeting room had completely disappeared. After receiving the orders, the assistant turned and left the room to fulfill her task, still processing what had happened. The protagonist watched her go, enjoying the view. As soon as she left, the sharp smile returned to his face. Now, it was time to put the real plan into action. The revenge was just beginning. And the first stop on the protagonist's revenge plan was the most luxurious hotel in the city, a place where only the richest and most powerful met. And speaking of powerful, a sports car arrived at high speed, screeching tires at the entrance. From it, a man emerged who exuded arrogance and money, clearly accustomed to that type of environment. He observed the hotel with an air of superiority, confirming that this was the best place in the city, perfect for someone of his caliber. He reflected that the only flaw in the place was the price, but he soon concluded that this was not a problem of the hotel, but a problem of people who could not afford it. With a dismissive gesture, he threw the keys to the employees, who greeted him with a bow and called him by name. VIP treatment. He entered with the confidence of someone who owned the place, savoring the luxurious life he led. Right at the entrance, an employee greeted him, asking if he would like his usual order. He was, after all, a known customer. But he refused, saying that on that day he would place the order himself. The woman, a little surprised, just agreed. Only suddenly, a familiar voice interrupted him, calling him brother. Turning around, he came face to face with the person he least expected to see there. The protagonist, accompanied by a woman. That arrogant smile vanished instantly. He couldn't understand what the young man was doing there and asked who the person next to him was. Ignoring the hostility, our hero simply extended his hand for a greeting. He formally introduced himself as a disciple of that man's professor, shaking his hand firmly. Meanwhile, the woman accompanying the protagonist watched the scene with a slight smile, aware that everything was going as planned. The man in the suit accepted the handshake, maintaining an air of superiority. He seemed to be assessing the young man in front of him, completely confident in his own position, but inside, a plan was already beginning to form. This unexpected encounter seemed to have sparked his interest in a rather unfriendly way. The tranquility of the meeting was broken by an unexpected provocation, leaving one of the protagonist's companions in shock. The woman with glasses didn't let it slide and confronted him directly, questioning his attitude. But the man in the suit just replied that this wasn't even the beginning. While his friend was exploding with anger at the offense, the protagonist remained completely calm. With a peaceful smile, he responded, showing that the provocations didn't affect him. The young man's calmness seemed to amuse the man in the suit. He laughed and made a sarcastic comment, clearly underestimating the situation and the people in front of him. His reaction was so strange that it left the protagonist and his companion completely confused. The man seemed genuinely happy with the conflict he himself had created. The woman, however, began to realize that there was something wrong with that man's behavior. All that joy wasn't normal. The protagonist then approached and explained the situation to her in a low voice. He said that the man was acting that way because he was afraid of their relationship. His explanation made perfect sense to her. The woman finally understood what was behind that strange attitude. And more than that, she was impressed by the young man's perception. He was different. Elsewhere, a man enjoyed a sumptuous banquet surrounded by servants. For him, this was just another ordinary meal, a luxury that had become routine. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the real banquet was much simpler. For some, a single piece of quality meat already represented a rare luxury, a moment to be properly savored. And this, in particular, was a top-notch piece of meat. A dish prepared with the mastery of someone who knew that the flavor of a moment could be unforgettable. Satisfied with dinner, the man gave his orders. He chose 2 of the women to drink with him, while the others should go dance. To top it off, he also promised 10,000 to each of them as a treat. The women accepted the offer, and the man in the suit enjoyed the company that his money could buy. The night was just beginning, and he felt like the king of the world. As ordered, the other women danced to entertain him, creating the perfect atmosphere for the private party he had set up. With all the attention focused on him, the man reveled in it. In his mind, there was nothing that money couldn't solve or provide. Happiness for him had a price, and he was more than willing to pay for every second of that feeling of power. One of the women noticed his satisfied expression and asked if everything was okay, just to keep the conversation pleasant. But the man's mind was already elsewhere. With a malicious smile, he made a somewhat more intimate proposal, suggesting that she help him relax. The woman didn't refuse. On the contrary, she just asked, in a provocative tone, if he wanted it to be right there, at that very moment. Suddenly, his expression changed completely. Something unexpected happened, totally breaking the mood he had built. He confirmed that yes, he wanted to change things up a bit that night, seeking a different experience. It was then that the other two approached with a counter-proposal. They said that if he was willing to pay a little more, they would also like to experience what the life of a rich man was like. The idea of having the attention of all of them at the same time drove the man wild. For him, this was the height of power and luxury, and a deal was sealed on the spot. Far from all that ostentation, in a completely different place, life followed a much simpler rhythm. At a university, students were preparing for an 800-meter race, and in the middle of the corridors was our protagonist, jogging calmly alongside his colleagues. For him, it was just another normal day of classes and physical activities. His friends chatted around him, commenting on the race and wondering what was happening without noticing anything different in the air. Until the protagonist noticed something. A slight smile appeared on his face, indicating that the day might not be so normal after all. Suddenly, a convoy of luxury cars interrupted the tranquility of the university. The unexpected arrival left all the students wondering what the heck was going on there. It wasn't just any convoy. There were several cars of a model that very few people in the world could afford. The license plate with 5 number 7s confirmed the visitor's status. Whoever was there was someone with extraordinary power and influence. The door opened and a single pair of expensive shoes touched the ground. Soon after, several others followed him, forming an intimidating escort. The tension in the air began to rise, and then the central figure revealed himself. It was the same suited man from the party, exuding confidence and power, surrounded by a legion of bodyguards. The crowd of students was in shock. They wondered what such a rich and famous celebrity would be doing there. Many recognized him from TV, commenting on his appearance and fortune without understanding the reason for the visit. But one of the protagonist's colleagues looked suspiciously, wondering what the man's real plan was. Ignoring the stares, the suited man and his entourage marched in an organized formation, heading straight towards the racetrack. Their target was clear: the small group of friends who were in the middle of the track, where our protagonist was. The young man found himself surrounded, completely taken by surprise by the sudden arrival of that army of suited men. They stopped, forming a perfect and silent line right in front of him, and then the unthinkable happened. The suited man, along with all his bodyguards, bowed in a gesture of extreme respect, begging him to take over the company again. The protagonist was completely paralyzed, without the slightest idea of what was happening. That situation was simply too bizarre to be real. The suited man, still bowed, reinforced his request. He confessed that in all his life, he had never bowed to anyone like that, showing how desperate the situation was. The scene was so absurd that the protagonist's friends couldn't take it. One of them exploded, accusing the young man of hiring actors for a terrible prank. Completely disbelieving, the friend grabbed him by the collar and shook him hard, demanding that he stop with that ridiculous farce. The protagonist, however, seemed to be in another world. Another colleague just laughed at the situation, pointing at the protagonist as if he were the clown of the year. For them, it was impossible that their friend was someone important. The argument heated up, and the friend went on the attack. But, to everyone's surprise, the protagonist blocked the punch with frightening ease, without even flinching. With a subtle smile, the protagonist covered his face. He then addressed the suited men, telling them to go back and take care of the company, as if dismissing a servant. The suited man, however, did not seem offended. On the contrary, he gave a confident smile, as if that behavior was exactly what he expected from his young master. At that moment, The facade of the ordinary student crumbled. An overwhelming aura emanated from the protagonist, who finally accepted his power. Before him, the men bowed even further, begging for his forgiveness. From afar, a woman watched everything, confused. She wondered what the hell was happening to that boy, who suddenly seemed like a completely different person. The protagonist now looked at everyone with an air of superiority. The confused college student had disappeared, giving way to someone much more intimidating. The suited man, radiant with the change, introduced the real young master to his subordinates. The protagonist, in turn, seemed increasingly annoyed with all that theater. Fed up with the scene, he ordered everyone to get out of his sight immediately. Without questioning, the suited men hurried to obey, crawling away. The group leader, however, burst into tears. He lamented, saying that having to deal with the young master's temper was the biggest mistake and the greatest suffering of his life. The protagonist's friends were paralyzed, in a state of shock. They couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Who was the person they shared the dorm with? Later that night, the scenery changed. The protagonist was not in his simple room at the university, but in front of a luxurious mansion. The normal student life seemed to have come to an end. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a woman approached the man on the sofa, full of questions. She wanted to understand who that mysterious young man was and why he treated him with so much respect, calling him young master. The man just smiled, completely relaxed. He said she was just imagining things, that there was nothing to worry about. But it dawned on the woman, and she was shocked. She always considered her brother to be an amazing person, but the truth was different. That young man was, in fact, his boss. The man confirmed her suspicions. He revealed that the young man was a legendary figure since he was 15 years old, leaving the woman even more perplexed by the dimension of his power. The revelation completely changed the woman's attitude. Realizing the opportunity, she decided that she needed to get closer to that powerful man in any way. She then sat next to the protagonist with an inviting expression. The woman said she wanted to hear more about the young master, and maybe he could tell her the details. The man, however, was completely embarrassed by her approach. He tried to push her away, saying that it was not appropriate. Without being intimidated, she was even more direct, asking if her brother had sent her to be his girlfriend. In a panic, the man denied it right away. To escape the situation, he made up that he had a date and fled in a hurry. The woman stayed behind, watching and finding her brother's behavior very strange. Far away, the protagonist sped through the city lights in his sports car. He wasn't alone. Beside him, an elegant woman seemed delighted to have been invited to the event that night, commenting that she wasn't called for nothing. She looked at him confidently, suggesting that if he invested in her, the return would be guaranteed. The business proposal was on the table. They finally arrived at their destination, a luxury hotel where a big party was about to begin. At the entrance, an employee greeted them and indicated that the event was taking place on the 7th floor. The protagonist and his companion moved forward. As soon as they entered the hall, all eyes turned to the couple. The protagonist walked with an imposing posture, attracting the attention and greetings of the other guests. Meanwhile, at another table, a woman was discussing the details of a partnership with one of the guests, under the watchful eye of the man who seemed to be the head of the operation, silently observing everything. On stage, the master of ceremonies kicked off the event. He announced that it was a charity dinner and that donations would begin soon, thanking everyone for their presence. And with that, the charity auction began. Several companies quickly raised their hands, offering donations of millions to support the cause and ensure their prestige at the event. But then, the protagonist made his move, surpassing all previous offers with a casual gesture. The woman next to him was completely shocked by the absurd amount he offered. The young man's offer left everyone in the room in shock. No one expected such a high bid coming from someone they didn't even recognize. The protagonist, however, seemed to be enjoying the situation. He revealed with a smile that he didn't care about the amount, as the money he was spending wasn't even his. Whispers began to spread through the hall. Some guests commented that the protagonist was only there because another important person had been rejected at the event entrance. Completely ignoring the comments, the protagonist raised his glass, proposing a toast to friendship and the success that was to come that night. A toast was sealed. He then turned to his companion and promised that he would make her name the most well-known of all, leaving the girl completely speechless with the promise. Back on stage, the master of ceremonies thanked everyone effusively for the generous donation, celebrating the success of the charity event thanks to the unexpected contribution. But not everyone was convinced. The bald man, who was watching from afar, questioned whether the partnership that the protagonist seemed to have with the woman was really genuine. Determined to test it, the man approached the protagonist's table to talk business. He mentioned a 600 million project and a 30 million commission, testing the young man's reaction. He tried to remain calm, reminding the protagonist that no contract had been signed yet and that he shouldn't speak so arrogantly about the matter. The man's attitude irritated the protagonist. With a cold look, he warned that the person he despised the most was the one who betrayed him, and that the end for traitors was always terrible. The bald man smiled, convinced that he had understood the situation. For him, all he needed was to be patient to get what he wanted, and he already knew exactly what the president of the other company intended to do. The protagonist, however, didn't seem impressed at all. Ignoring the bald man, another man approached the table with a partnership proposal, asking what the young man thought of the idea. He, however, replied that he also didn't know what to think about it. The bald man's attitude changed completely. He became agitated, shouting that his investment company was not a small business to be treated with such contempt. Without giving a damn about the outburst, the protagonist shook the other man's hand, closing the deal right in front of the bald man. The businessman was shocked, asking what that meant. The protagonist then revealed that his company's contract was already in his hands, and that he wouldn't let such a valuable resource be wasted. It was at that moment that it clicked. The bald man realized the trap he had just walked into, questioning how the young man could be so cruel. The protagonist kept his gaze steady, making it clear that there would be no problems. Meanwhile, the man who closed the deal was celebrating the success. A woman congratulated him on how quickly he closed such a big deal. Soon after, another businessman approached the protagonist, inviting him to dinner as a thank you. The lucky man's celebration continued, completely oblivious to the storm brewing behind the scenes. Far away, the news of the betrayal arrived with the impact of a punch on the table. The bald man's original partner exploded with rage in his office, furious at his partner's audacity in trying to step over him. But his anger didn't last long. Soon, he was on his knees in front of a man named Joe Ping, who explained that they could still resolve the situation, as he still had the money and the support of the other company's president. With a sinister smile, Joe Ping revealed his plan. He would organize an event and invite all parties involved for a major showdown. The orange-haired man assured his accomplice that the plan was perfect. He promised that the humiliation they were about to cause would be absolutely unforgettable. The mere mention of the target made his associate's blood boil. He could barely contain his anger, grinding his teeth in silent fury. The stage for the trap was set in a luxury hotel in the city center, and the night unfolded exactly as they expected, leaving behind only the evidence of a very well-planned mess. The next morning, the architect of the plan woke up feeling victorious. He reflected on how fun the rich life was, and that fortunately, the woman next to him didn't have a boyfriend to ruin everything. He touched her face with his fingertips, savoring the success of his conquest, and the coup he had pulled off. The woman, upon waking up, showered him with praise. She said that he would finally teach that traitor a lesson, leaving the man even more confident in his victory. His ego simply exploded. At that moment, he felt like the smartest and most powerful person in the world. But while he was celebrating, the news was spreading at the university. The protagonist's classmates gathered around a cell phone, laughing and pointing at the screen. Struck head-on by shame, the protagonist covered his face. He didn't want to believe what was happening right in front of him. But then, suddenly, the tables completely turned. The man who thought he was a genius received news that sent him into a panic. A donation of 30 million had been made. In the classroom, the mockery turned into admiration. Classmates now surrounded the protagonist, praising his generosity for donating 30 million without saying a word to anyone. One of the friends was in shock, unable to process the information. He admitted that his biggest donation in life had been 5 million, an insignificant amount compared to the protagonist's. The news reached the teachers. One of them came into the room to congratulate the young man personally, calling his act an example for the entire school. Completely embarrassed by all the attention, the protagonist tried to downplay the feat. He said it was no big deal, just something he felt needed to be done. The teacher couldn't contain himself and shouted for the whole room to hear. He declared that the protagonist was the most honorable person he had ever seen, a true example of integrity for everyone. Meanwhile, one of the protagonist's friends felt a mixture of envy and contempt. He thought about how that act of generosity was just a way to burn the money he wanted so badly. The admiration wasn't limited to students and teachers. Even one of the most respected figures in the university seemed impressed with the young man's attitude. The reality of the situation finally hit the envious friend. It dawned on him so brutally that he was completely paralyzed, unable to believe what was happening. The protagonist's patience with his friend's attitude reached its limit. Without warning, he landed a blow that silenced the envious friend immediately. Far away, in a luxurious office, the man in the suit who served the protagonist seemed to be going through a difficult time, wondering who was responsible for his situation. His secretary approached, worried, and asked if he was sick because of the previous night. Trying to keep his composure, he denied it and said that he was actually thinking about her. His answer didn't convince her at all. Playfully, but with a touch of irritation, she scolded him for the cheap flirting attempt. The man in the suit then changed his tone. He said he was tired and needed her to recharge him, a clear insinuation for her to give him a massage or something like that. Alone for a moment, he smiled contentedly. He reflected that things were much easier to talk about without certain clothes, remembering that the previous night had been quite fun. But the moment of relaxation was interrupted. The office phone rang, bringing business back to reality. The secretary answered the call and confirmed, surprised, that the visitor had already arrived. With a serious expression, the boss simply gave the order for the person to come up. While the visitor hadn't arrived yet, the secretary prepared the tea, already anticipating the meeting that was to come. And then, the visitor entered. A man of imposing appearance and reddish hair, who went straight to the point, wanting to know what matter they had to discuss with him. The man in the suit wasted no time. He revealed the reason for the meeting, a proposal involving 80% of the company's shares, a matter he wanted to discuss personally with the newcomer. The visitor, however, refused the proposal immediately. He explained that he did not have the right to interfere in their affairs, but that he was there to leave a message. He wasn't interested in shares or power. His motives were purely personal, and he acted according to his own convictions. The man in the suit, however, listened to everything with a smug smile. He seemed to already expect this reaction, as if everything was going exactly as planned. The host's confidence made the visitor tense. There was something very wrong with all that calm. The redhead then questioned why he should trust him. The man in the suit was direct, stating that it was not about help, but about a common hatred they shared for traitors. To prove his point, he revealed that he had been following the visitor's older brother's steps for many years. An alliance was being proposed there. After a moment of reflection, the visitor made his decision. He accepted the proposal and made a promise. And with a toast, the deal was sealed. Later, the office was silent again, bathed in sunlight. Apparently, there was no one else there. However, hidden in a flower pot, a small listening device glowed discreetly. The entire conversation had been recorded. Alone in his chair, the man in the suit smiled contentedly. His plan was underway. Suddenly, a woman burst into the room, completely panicked. She was desperately trying to explain that the two of them had been seen together in a hotel. The woman was sweating cold, terrified of the consequences, but her boss watched her with a disturbing calm, as if he wasn't surprised at all. The woman tried to disguise her nervousness with a forced smile, praising the boss as sweat dripped down. She was clearly trying to mitigate the disastrous situation she had just announced. But the news finally hit the man in the suit. The previous calm disappeared, and he began to feel the weight of the problem that was forming. Seeing his slow reaction, the woman exploded. She grabbed him and screamed, questioning how he could be so oblivious to the danger they were both in, especially being a married man. Reality hit with full force. The man panicked completely, realizing that his life was about to fall apart because of that exposure. But in the midst of despair, an idea seemed to emerge. His eyes focused, and the panic gave way to a flash of determination. He recomposed himself, or at least tried to. He told the woman not to worry, that it was just a small problem. However, his trembling hand, spilling the drink, betrayed his true state. Out of nowhere, he pulled out an old tape player, a relic from another era. The woman didn't understand anything, and then he simply put on his headphones and started dancing in the middle of the office, completely ignoring the crisis. It was his bizarre way of dealing with stress. While he lost himself in the music, the woman was left behind, crying in despair and confusion. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Suddenly, he gave her a thumbs up. The woman, through her tears, seemed to understand that it was part of some crazy plan. With a confident smile, the man in the suit seemed to have everything under control again. He was ready to face the consequences. Only his cell phone rang. On the screen, the name he feared most at that moment, his wife. The whole charade crumbled in a second. The panic returned in full force, and he almost dropped his cell phone, yelling at the woman not to panic, even though he himself was panicking. He answered the call, and the voice on the other end was exactly what he expected. His wife knew everything and was furious. The man could only scream in pure terror, without the slightest idea how to get out of that situation. The plan, whatever it was, had gone down the drain. The whole crisis had started moments before. The woman in the suit had barely finished explaining the situation, and the man in the suit already felt the sweat running down. The problem was much bigger than he imagined. While that man's world was collapsing elsewhere, our protagonist's only concern was a sudden sneeze that came out of nowhere. He kept walking down the hall, but he couldn't shake the strange feeling he had. The young man wondered why, all of a sudden, he felt a chill run down his body. Later that night, the tranquility in the luxurious mansion was just a facade for the chaos that was about to set in. Inside, his wife was already waiting for him. The conversation they were about to have would not be pleasant, but he remembered what things were like before. Their relationship used to be full of teasing and games, and she would playfully question him about his interests. She always seemed to know him very well, analyzing every detail of his behavior with a precision that, at the time, seemed just part of her charm. The flirting between the two intensified. At that moment, it seemed that nothing in the world could shake the connection they had. But that connection was broken. Reality hit him like a punch. He thought he was just paying a visit, but realized too late that he had fallen into a trap. And now, on the phone, he was hearing the consequences of his actions. Every word from his wife was a confirmation that he had been completely exposed. The initial panic began to give way to a cold determination. If he was going to fall, it wouldn't be without a fight. A dangerous idea began to form in his mind. The solution to his problems, however, could be in a completely different place, during an important event. He was present at the conference, but his mind was miles away, planning his next move. The woman next to him tried to talk to him, but the man barely paid attention. His attitude did not go unnoticed. Sitting right behind, two important men commented about him, realizing that his reputation was at stake at that very moment. The contract signing ceremony began. The host called to the stage the president of the Changhong Company, who walked with unwavering confidence, waving to the audience. The event host took the microphone and welcomed everyone, setting the stage for what appeared to be an important business announcement. The cameras filmed every detail. The event was being broadcast, and any mistake or surprise would be recorded for all to see. However, the host gave a malicious smile. He made a point of directing his next words to a specific person in the audience, as if he were starting a provocation. Sitting in the front row, the man in the suit responded to the gesture with a smug look. He signaled that he was ready, indicating that the show could begin. On stage, the host continued his speech, promising that all doubts would be clarified soon. He then prepared to call the director of another company for the signing. Only, to his surprise, who went on stage was a completely different man, with a mohawk and an imposing posture. He simply took the microphone, leaving the host speechless. In a panic, the original host tried to whisper something in the intruder's ear, questioning what was happening. The situation had completely gotten out of his control. The audience was also confused by the unexpected exchange. The celebratory atmosphere gave way to a silent tension as everyone tried to understand the twist. The man with the mohawk ignored the confusion around him. He cleared his throat, adjusted the microphone, and prepared to make his own announcement. And then he shouted a bombshell statement. The announcement was so shocking that the original host and the presenter were paralyzed with terror in the background. The news was so impactful that it seemed to have gone around the world. He announced a new partnership, one that no one there expected. The host's face contorted in pure despair. He couldn't process what had just happened. His carefully orchestrated plan had been destroyed in an instant. Meanwhile, in the audience, the man in the suit and his companion burst out laughing. They couldn't contain themselves in the face of their rival's public humiliation. The turnaround had been an absolute success. The man in the suit was laughing so hard he was crying, confirming that everything had gone exactly as he planned. The reporter, with a mocking smile, reminded the director that it was too late to turn back. A verbal agreement had been made, and now he would have to face the consequences. With the public humiliation underway, the man in the suit was invited onto the stage. Behind him, his partner could barely contain his laughter, savoring the victory. And the man in the suit didn't disappoint. He took the stage and began dancing with the microphone, turning the business event into his own personal celebration show. After the performance, he approached the defeated director. With a victorious grin, the young man sarcastically applauded him, rubbing salt in the open wound. In front of the entire audience, he loudly declared that he admired the director from the bottom of his heart. The irony was so thick that it left the event organizers speechless. News of the turnaround spread like wildfire. Representatives from other companies in the audience, shocked by what they were seeing, began making urgent calls. The same happened with the investors. The woman from Plug-in Investment could hardly believe what she was witnessing, realizing that the balance of power had just shifted. Unable to endure any more humiliation, the director completely lost control. Blinded by rage, he lunged at the man in the suit, ready to settle things with force. The audience was in shock. The corporate event had turned into a public brawl, and no one knew how to react to this outburst of violence. But before the director could reach him, a new figure entered the hall. Accompanied by 2 security guards, he walked with an aura of authority that silenced the room. One of the security guards intercepted the director halfway, showing an ID that made him freeze. It was clear that these people were not ordinary guests. The director was immobilized and handcuffed on the spot. As he was dragged out, he shouted that the red-haired man was a traitor, a nobody he himself had helped to grow. The red-haired man simply watched the scene with a satisfied smile. In the background, the man in the suit was also smiling. This was the real checkmate of their plan. With his enemy finally removed from the way, the man in the suit took the microphone once again. It was time to formalize his victory for everyone present. After consolidating his power, he announced that he had more to do and said goodbye. Accompanied by a woman, the young man left the event as the big winner of the day. After the victory that consolidated his power, the man in the suit met with his ally in his new and imposing office. It was time to settle the final accounts. He maintained an air of superiority, as if the world were in his hands. Everything seemed to be going exactly according to his master plan. In a cold tone, the man in the suit declared that their partnership had come to an end and asked if the other had anything else to say, already ending the matter. The red-haired man was silent, processing the sudden change in attitude. The alliance that had led them to victory seemed to have been forgotten in an instant. It was then that the man in the suit turned the toilet towards him with a smirk. On the screen, a recording of that same meeting was being played. The entire conversation, every word had been recorded as evidence. The red-haired man couldn't hide his shock. He finally understood the situation. It wasn't a meeting to divide the spoils, but a very well-planned trap. The victorious smile of the man in the suit confirmed everything. This was never a meeting of allies, but his final move to ensure absolute control. The betrayal was clear. He realized that he had only been a pawn in someone much more cunning's game. Completely cornered, the red-haired man asked what he wanted in return for all of this. The man in the suit explained that he didn't intend to simply steal his shares. He would offer compensation, a consolation prize for his forced collaboration. The humiliation was immense. He felt powerless, knowing he had no choice but to accept. Sweat dripped as anger and defeat took over. He had been completely outmaneuvered. To seal the deal, the man in the suit pushed a contract across the table, demanding that his wife also sign the documents. It was checkmate. As compensation, the man in the suit offered a simple credit card, an almost insulting offer for the loss of an entire company. He turned the card over, showing that it didn't even have a real name. It was a gesture of pure contempt, an anonymous payment for the life he was stealing. His expression left no doubt. The negotiation was over, and now it was time to accept the consequences. The red-haired young man could barely react. He was cornered, staring at the man who had just taken everything he had. With a victorious smile, the man in the suit already considered the company his. For him, the battle was won and the future secured. And so, an empire changed hands. Outside, he acted as if nothing had happened. He explained that everything went according to plan, every detail predicted. His companion seemed impressed. She asked how he managed to convince the former owner, how he predicted every move with such precision. He responded with complete confidence, saying that from that day on, she would work for him, and he instructed her to try her best under his new command. The woman was visibly embarrassed by the statement. His display of power had clearly left a strong impression on her. Shortly after, a board meeting was called to formalize the shift in power. The former general manager, who felt secure in his position, began to speak. He believed the company's future was still in his hands. The assistant looked at her new boss, surprised by the old manager's audacity. She didn't know what to expect from his reaction, but the manager's illusion of control was shattered. He rose furiously as the truth came out, calling security to intervene. Too late. Despite the manager's calls for security, the tension in the air was palpable. The guard, caught in the crossfire, could only watch helplessly as the two men confronted each other. The man in the suit, however, didn't seem intimidated at all. On the contrary, he wore a smile of someone who already knew he had won the battle before it even began. With a simple gesture, he signaled to the woman accompanying him. Her admiration for him was evident, watching every move of the new boss. He then turned to the former manager, holding the documents that sealed the company's fate. The transfer of power was about to be completed, right in front of the man who had just lost everything. Each line on those papers was a confirmation of his victory. He could barely hide the satisfaction of having orchestrated everything perfectly. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the office, news of the company's acquisition spread like wildfire. Employees stared at their screens in disbelief, not understanding how such a drastic change could happen so quickly. Leaving the chaos behind, the new boss and his assistant moved forward. The first part of the plan was complete, and now it was time to introduce himself to the rest of the team. As they entered the meeting room, they were greeted with applause. The company's leadership had already been informed and now welcomed their new commander. The assistant formally introduced herself to the board, visibly happy to be alongside the man who now held all the power. It was a new beginning for her too. He took the moment to warn her that a senior executive would be transferred to help her. Furthermore, an important figure would be visiting them soon, and he expected her not to embarrass him. The news caught her by surprise, but she maintained her composure. The responsibility on her shoulders had just increased, and she needed to prove her worth. In the middle of the presentation, his cell phone rang. Without hesitation, he answered the call. He stepped aside to talk, and the tone of the conversation was serious. He demanded that the person on the other end of the line take responsibility for some mistake and explain the situation, making it clear that there would be no excuses. And on the other end of the line, the person receiving the scolding didn't seem worried at all. In fact, his smile revealed that it was all part of an even bigger plan. Meanwhile, in a modern and technological building, the person on the other end of the line calmly observed the surroundings. That was his world, and he was in control. It was our protagonist, who seemed completely oblivious to the despair he had just caused. He stretched, satisfied, as if he had just completed a simple task. The day had barely begun, and his plan was already working perfectly. But his peace was interrupted. The man in the suit, the same one who was freaking out on the phone, appeared in front of him, seething with rage and calling him a bastard. Instead of being shaken, the protagonist just smiled and waved as if he were greeting an old friend. The man in the suit admitted that he underestimated him. He said that the young man was much more cunning than he seemed, and that his acting skills were really a problem. The protagonist didn't seem surprised by the compliment at all. His confident smile made it clear that he knew exactly what he was doing. The young man's calmness completely disarmed the man in the suit. All of his pose of authority had simply disappeared. With an ironic gesture, the protagonist put his arm around the man's shoulders, treating him with a false intimacy that only irritated him even more. But suddenly, the young man's expression changed. He pushed him away abruptly, telling him to stay away from him. The sudden change in attitude caught the man in the suit by surprise, who just watched, not understanding what was happening. Regaining his composure, the man positioned himself in a higher location. He warned that he was going to another floor and that it was useless for the protagonist to follow him, as he would not get anything there. The young man just smiled and gestured as if he didn't care about the threat at all. His confidence was unshakable, and so the two walked together down a technological corridor surrounded by holographic screens. The cat and mouse game between them was far from over. The protagonist stopped suddenly, caught by surprise by an unexpected notification that appeared before him. He wasn't understanding what that meant. The man in the suit approached with a smug smile. He commented that, although there were many treasures there, none of that had anything to do with the young man. A holographic screen appeared, detailing a knowledge and power exchange mission that was worth points at the university. It was a valuable reward system. With disdain, the man in the suit advised him not to even waste time trying to check the points, as he was sure it would be useless. But the protagonist was not shaken. With a confident smile, he questioned whether things weren't quite as the man in the suit imagined, and with a glint in his eyes, our hero activated his own skill, accessing the system to prove the other was wrong. The result was immediate. The man in the suit panicked completely, screaming in shock upon seeing something he thought impossible. The truth was about to come out.